Dry scrub stretches low across the islands of Western Australia. Salt hangs faintly in the air. The ground is pale, broken by shrubs that cast thin, shifting shadows in the wind. Nothing moves for long. Then, briefly, something does. A small wallaby emerges from cover, pausing just beyond the edge of the vegetation. Its body is slight, its posture familiar, balanced on powerful hind legs, tail extended behind. For a moment, it could be mistaken for any number of wallabies, but across its back, faint bands interrupt the outline. Subtle, easy to miss, and they mark something different. The banded hare-wallaby is not simply another wallaby. It is the last surviving member of a lineage that split away early and has since almost entirely disappeared. And to understand it, we have to step back, beyond the wallabies we recognise today and into the deeper history of how they came to be. For this, we need to start with Macropodidae, the family that includes kangaroos, wallabies, and similar-looking relatives. Tree kangaroos, pademelons, rock wallabies, wallaroos, and many others. They are among the most recognisable animals of Australia. Forms built around powerful hind limbs, elongated feet, and a highly specialised form of hopping locomotion. But this apparent uniformity is misleading, because when we trace this lineage back through time, it does not begin with these highly specialised forms. Early members were smaller, less specialised, moving in ways that were likely more varied and less dependent on efficient long-distance hopping. From this generalised foundation, multiple branches emerged. 3 lineages are recognised within this group, but one of these has disappeared completely. These Thenurinae, the short-faced kangaroos, were distinctive for their short, robust skulls. They included the largest kangaroo to have ever lived, Procoptodingalaia, which stood around 2 meters tall. Most living species belong to a single lineage, Macropodidae. All of them, that is, with one exception, the banded hare-wallaby. This species is the sole survivor of the 3rd lineage, the Lagostrophus, a group that diverged earlier than the others, even before the short-faced kangaroos, and one that, today, has almost entirely disappeared. In the past, this lineage formed a small but distinct radiation, with multiple genera spread across mainland Australia. Fossils of animals such as Troposodon show that these early offshoots persisted alongside other kangaroo relatives, occupying their own place within the landscape. Their diversity, however, was subtle. These were not dramatically different forms. Instead, they remained relatively conservative, small to medium-sized animals with a generalised body plan that changed little even as other groups became increasingly specialised. They retained the ability to hop, but not the extreme specialisation and efficiency seen in larger kangaroos. Their proportions are more balanced, their movements shorter and more controlled, suited to life in dense vegetation rather than open ground. Over time, that quiet diversity began to narrow. Species disappeared, ranges shrank, and what was once a broader lineage was reduced, step by step. It was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual shift. Where several forms once existed, only one now remains, a single surviving branch of a lineage that has otherwise faded from existence. All of that diversity, multiple lineages, multiple forms, has narrowed to this: one surviving branch, one remaining species, the banded hare-wallaby, Lagostrophus fasciatus. At a glance, it is recognisable. The same upright posture, the same powerful hind legs, the same balance between tail and body seen across kangaroos and wallabies. It moves with the same underlying rhythm, a series of short hops, controlled and deliberate. But the closer it is examined, the more those familiar features begin to shift. The proportions are different. The limbs, though strong, are less exaggerated. The body is smaller, more lightly built. Across the back, faint horizontal bands break up the outline, a pattern rarely seen in its relatives, and one that gives the species its name. These are small differences, easy to overlook, but taken together, they reflect something deeper, not just variation within a group, but a lineage that has followed a different path. Here, it is worth remembering that common names are not precise. The banded hare-wallaby is not the only relative of kangaroos to bear that name. The genus Lagostrophus includes the rufous hare-wallaby and spectacled hare-wallaby, along with several extinct species. But despite the similarity in name and appearance, they are not especially close relatives. Those species belong to the same broader radiation as modern kangaroos and wallabies. The banded hare-wallaby does not. It stands apart. But before focusing solely on the banded hare-wallaby, there is one more aspect of the wider group that is important: their diversity. The basic kangaroo body plan has been adapted in different ways depending on how each species moves through its environment. In open landscapes, the larger kangaroos are built for efficiency: long limbs, elastic tendons, and a form optimized for covering large distances. In rocky terrain, species such as the rock wallabies are more compact, with shorter limbs and greater control, allowing them to move with precision across uneven ground. In denser vegetation, smaller forms, including the hare-wallabies, are adapted for short, rapid movements between cover. And in the forests of New Guinea and northern Australia, the tree kangaroos have taken this body plan into the trees, with stronger forelimbs and a very different style of movement altogether. These are not entirely different designs. They are variations on the same underlying structure, shaped by different environments and different ways of moving between them. The banded hare-wallaby sits within this range, despite its more distant evolutionary relationship. At first glance, it appears to align more closely with the smaller ground-dwelling forms, particularly the other hare-wallabies. But that similarity is, in part, deceptive. In overall size and shape, it closely resembles species like the rufous hare-wallaby. Both are small, lightly built, and adapted to life in dense vegetation. But the resemblance is due to convergent evolution. It reflects a similar set of environmental pressures acting on two separate lineages, faced with the same constraints: limited visibility, dense cover, the need for rapid controlled movement. Their bodies have arrived at similar solutions. This is a pattern seen repeatedly in evolution: different lineages, shaped by similar conditions, converging on similar forms. That convergence in overall form becomes less complete when the animal is examined closely. The skull, for example, reflects a feeding strategy that differs in emphasis from many other small wallabies. The muzzle is relatively short, the jaws are built for processing a mixed diet of grasses and low vegetation. The teeth, particularly the molars, are adapted for grinding, but without the extreme specialization seen in some grazing kangaroos. This more generalized dentition allows for flexibility. Rather than relying on a narrow range of food sources, it can exploit a variety of plant material, an advantage in environments where availability shifts over time. The forelimbs, too, play a subtle but important role. At slower speeds, they support the body as it moves and feeds, contributing to a gait that is more grounded than in larger, highly specialized kangaroos. The hands are capable of grasping and manipulating vegetation, bringing food toward the mouth with controlled, deliberate movements. Even the tail, while still functioning as a counterbalance during movement, is proportioned in a way that reflects this overall balance of the body. It supports stability rather than acting purely as a dynamic stabilizer during high-speed locomotion. None of these features are extreme in isolation, but together they form a consistent pattern. A body not pushed toward a single, highly specialized lifestyle, but shaped for flexibility, control, and movement within a complex, cluttered environment. That balance of traits is reflected in how the banded hare-wallaby lives. Activity is largely centered around the edges of light and darkness. During the day, individuals remain concealed within dense vegetation, sheltered from heat and exposure. They settle into shallow hollows at the base of low shrubs, often prickly acacia bushes, where branches and shadows break up their outline and provide protection. As conditions cool, they emerge to feed, moving cautiously through their surroundings, rarely straying far from cover. Their diet is varied. Grass forms an important component, but they also consume leaves, seeds, and low-growing plants, selecting from what is available rather than relying on a single food source. This flexibility mirrors the structure of the teeth and jaws, an animal adapted to changing conditions rather than a fixed niche. Movement, too, follows this pattern. Rather than traveling long distances, individuals tend to occupy relatively small home ranges. Within these areas, they move in short, deliberate sequences, feeding, pausing, and retreating back to shelter. The landscape is not just land to cross, but an obstacle to navigate. Socially, they are more often encountered in small groups than many other similar-sized wallabies. These groups are loosely organised, with individuals maintaining awareness of one another while still foraging independently. In dense vegetation, this offers a balance between vigilance and competition. More eyes to detect danger without the constraints of tightly coordinated movement. Predation pressure has shaped much of this behaviour. Remaining close to cover, moving in controlled bursts, and limiting exposure all reduce the risk of detection. Reproduction follows the same pattern of flexibility. Like other marsupials, the banded hare-wallaby gives birth to highly underdeveloped young, which continue their development within the pouch. But beyond this, it retains an additional ability, one that allows reproduction to be delayed when conditions are not favourable. Through a process known as embryonic diapause, development can be temporarily paused. A fertilized embryo remains dormant when conditions are not favourable. This serves more than one function. In changing environments, it allows reproduction to be delayed until conditions improve, reducing the risk of raising young when resources are limited, putting both the joey and the mother in danger. But it also allows reproduction to overlap. A female can carry a developing embryo while still raising a joey in the pouch. Only once that joey leaves does the paused embryo resume development, ensuring that one stage of reproduction can follow immediately after another. It is not simply a delay, but a form of control, aligning reproduction both with the environment and with the demands of raising young. Taken together, these behaviours form a consistent pattern, not an animal of open ground or long journeys, but one defined by proximity, to cover, to resources, and to the limits of its immediate surroundings. For most of its history, the banded hare-wallaby was widespread. It occurred across much of southern Australia, inhabiting shrublands and semi-arid environments where dense vegetation provided the cover on which it depends. This was not a rare or marginal species, but part of a broader ecological fabric, one that supported many small to medium-sized animals to move through layered, structured habitats. That distribution did not persist. Following European settlement, these systems were altered at multiple levels. Vegetation was cleared and reshaped, fire regimes changed, and most importantly, new predators were introduced, especially the red fox and feral cat. For an animal defined by proximity to cover and controlled movement, these changes were profound. Dense vegetation was reduced or fragmented, and the introduction of new wide-ranging predators shifted the balance in ways it could not compensate for. Remaining close to shelter, once an advantage, became less effective when predators could hunt across those same spaces with speed and persistence. The decline was not immediate, but it was extensive. Across the mainland, populations disappeared, contracting inward until the species had been lost from nearly all of its former range. What remains today survives largely because of isolation. Two natural refuges, Bernier Island and Dorey Island, have preserved populations that persisted as the mainland was lost. Separated by water, these islands have remained free from foxes and largely protected from the pressures that reshape the continent. But isolation is not stability. Small, contained populations are vulnerable to disturbance, fire, disease, shifts in vegetation, or simple chance. Each refuge holds only a fraction of what once existed, both in numbers and in genetic diversity. This is exactly why the IUCN continues to classify the banded hare-wallaby as vulnerable. The populations that remain are stable, but stability at this tiny scale can be deceptive. A single severe event, drought, fire, or the arrival of predators, could move through a population quickly, with little resistance. There is no longer a broader network of populations to absorb that loss, no wider distribution to buffer against it. They could move from apparent security to critically endangered within a very short time, if conditions were to worsen. The risk is not only what is happening now, but what could happen, and how little margin for error remains. To address this, conservation efforts have attempted to expand that foothold. Translocations have established additional populations on other islands and in fenced mainland reserves, aiming to recreate the conditions that once allowed the species to flourish. Some of these efforts have been successful, demonstrating that, given protection from introduced predators and access to suitable habitat, the species can recover and maintain stable populations. In 2017, 60 banded hare-wallabies were released in the Mount Gibson Wildlife Sanctuary, the largest predator-free haven in mainland Western Australia. This move marked the first time in more than 100 years that banded hare-wallabies were living on the Australian mainland. Earlier attempts to reintroduce banded hare-wallabies to places like Dirk Hartog Island and the Perron Peninsula in the 1970s and early 2000s were much less successful. These were not failures due to mismanagement, but rather the threats that drove their original decline, especially cats, had not yet been fully removed. On Dirk Hartog, cats were still present and shrub cover had been degraded by grazing and drought, leaving the wallabies exposed. On Perron, insufficient predator control meant feral cats continued to predate the small translocated populations. Both cases highlight how critical complete predator removal and habitat recovery are before reintroductions can succeed. Dirk Hartog Island was finally declared cat-free in 2017, allowing conservationists to reintroduce 11 mammalian species that had been lost from the island, including the banded hare-wallaby. This underscores 2 points: the importance of waiting until conditions are suitable before attempting relocations, and the dramatic impact that feral cats alone can have on the survival of this species. Today, the banded hare-wallaby survives thanks to careful management, protected refuges, and strategic reintroductions. Its populations remain small and confined, making them vulnerable to the same threats that wiped out much of their former range. But these efforts also show what is possible when habitat, predators, and resources are carefully managed. This unique lineage can persist. Conservation is not just about numbers. It is about creating the conditions where a species that has already endured so much can continue to move, forage, and breed, securing a foothold for the future. From an ancient lineage that once roamed across southern Australia, the banded hare-wallaby has survived against the odds. Its small, delicate body, its controlled hops, and the faint bands along its back are more than features. They are traces of a lineage that has endured millions of years of change. Today, it lives only in carefully protected refuges and conservation reserves, a reminder that of both the resilience of life and its fragility. The story of the banded hare-wallaby is not just about survival. It is about the ongoing balance between species, landscape, and human stewardship. In safeguarding these last remnants, we preserve a living connection to the ancient past, and to a future that, with care, is still possible. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the banded hare-wallaby. If you're interested in the research behind this episode, you can find a document with image credits and sources in the description below. These videos take a great deal of time and research to produce. They will always remain free to watch. But if you would like to support the channel and gain access to new videos a little earlier, you can find a link to my Patreon below as well. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much to discover about the world's rare and remarkable species. And the more we understand, the better our chances of protecting them. Thanks for watching.